Hi, everyone. We got a few people coming in yet, so please bear with us one second while we wait for everybody to join. All right, well, it looks like I stopped rolling in, so let's take it from here. This is Bill Elliott. I'm President and CEO of WHLA. Thank you so much for joining us today. As you know, if you're on this call right now, the federal government came out with some news on expanding the H2B cap not too long ago. And when HLA had spread the word with us, we shared that to all of our members, and both Monica and I here in the office started getting a lot of questions, many of them that we couldn't answer around the H2B visa program and how it works. So we set out to find an expert in this area, and luckily, through some connections, we happen to know Keith Pabian here. Keith works with other associations in our space and plenty of other hospitality folks around the country, and does that with two companies. He has Seasonal Connect and Pabian Law. So with that, Keith, I'd like to turn it over to you, and let's get the show on the road.
Yeah, sounds good. So Bill and Monica, thank you so much. I was really excited for this. We work with several hotels in Wisconsin, and it's definitely a state that I'm interested in really learning more and more about. I'm actually talking to you from right outside of Boston, Massachusetts, but my immigration practice is very, very national. We work with clients literally in every state of the United States. And Seasonal Connect by its nature is both national and international. So really excited for this. What Bill and I were talking about in terms of our goal for this is not only explaining what happened a couple of weeks ago when they announced more visas, but also just giving you some ideas and background on the H2B visa program overall. Wisconsin is a state, in my opinion, from what I've seen from working with so many, that I think it's underutilizing this visa. And it's funny, to get anyone on a webinar these days, I think is hard. And I think the attendance for the live version of this shows that all of you are struggling with staffing. It's a very common theme. So my goal for today is to give you the background, give you some basics, but also give you some ideas and a roadmap to how you can make this a successful program if your property decides to move forward. So I gave you a little bit of background already. That's what I look like, about 8 years younger. As again, I live right outside of Boston, Mass. My firm has been open for about 10 years now. We're coming up on our 10-year anniversary. Seasonal Connect is still a baby. We're coming up on a year and a half of being open. Pabian Law, we have about 40-something people now working for us, that about 30 of those, all they do every single day is H2B visas. So we are one of the largest hospitality H2B filers in the country. Last year we helped clients bring in about 6,000 workers. So it's a lot. Seasonal Connect was a missing piece. I call it my COVID baby. It was designed to try to allow organizations to find seasonal staff as well as seasonal partners, where you can exchange workers back and forth between seasons. Two completely separate companies, though. I always want to start with this. Pabian Law and Seasonal Connect, different staffs, different companies, different addresses. You don't have to be a client of one to be a client of the other. So even if you already do H2Bs and work with a law firm, Seasonal Connect can be a great avenue to find staff and find connections and find information. All right. So let's get into why we're here today. So utilizing H2B visa workers. Now, I'm not going to go into all of these subcategories, but I always think it's helpful, or at least it's helpful for me when I was first learning immigration law. And when I was thinking about the lodging industry and hospitality and all the other seasonal industries that use H2Bs, it's helpful to understand what else is out there. Right, because what I'm about to tell you is there's some really big positives to H2Bs, but there's also some really big headaches. And so understanding what else is out there is helpful to understand why H2Bs oftentimes are one of your only options. Now, I have a gut, my gut tells me that a lot of you already use J1s, and that's wonderful. One of my messages for today, one of my parting messages is going to be to really diversify your staffing. And so if you're using J1s, that's wonderful. But J1s are kids, right? They're by definition students that have recently graduated, can come to you for up to 4 months if they're coming through the work and travel program. They they've really replaced for a lot of organizations what the college kids used to do. But they don't get you the shoulder seasons. They're a lot of times this is one of their first jobs. It's not that high level of service that you might want to provide. It's also hard to bring them back for subsequent years. H2B visas we're going to talk about. Other than that, the options are terrible. There's these year-round options, but most of them, or not most, all of them either require the person has reached the top of his or her field and can prove it, or that the person is from a certain country, and that the job requires a bachelor's degree, which in hospitality is very hard to prove. And then you have green card applications, which can actually be a really good option long-term, but that takes 2 to 3 years to go through. So my point to you is, as we're going through H2Bs over the next bit here during this webinar, just understand that there's really no better option if the J1 visa alone isn't working for you. Okay. So what is an H2B? Let's get into this. The H2B visa, you're lucky that you get this. Most organizations don't qualify. For example, my law firm would never qualify for an H2B visa. And the reason why is because we're not seasonal. You have to prove seasonality. It's at the heart of H2B visas. Now, you can apply for up to 10 months of the year, but the way that it really works is you apply for your season. So the government wants to see a bell curve of seasonality. They want to see that your staffing levels, your revenues and expenses all go up during the times that you apply, and they come down during the times that you're not applying for the H2Bs. Okay. So even though you can get it for up to 10 months, a lot of you are probably looking at like maybe 6 to 8 months of a season. You have to apply every year, which is good and bad, right? The good part is you can make tweaks year to year. You can change the dates, you can change the start date, the end date, the numbers that you're requesting, the positions that you're requesting. The bad part is you have to do it every year, right? It's another workflow that you have to be responsible for. It's a long workflow, which I'm going to show you in a second. And it's a budget expense that you have to plan for every year. Now, in immigration law, this is unheard of. You get to actually set the requirements of the position as well as the start and end dates. So you get to say to the government, hey, government, we need people from May through October, and we are going to require that all of our housekeepers have at least 3 months of hospitality experience. You can do all of that with this visa. Now, at the end of the process, the workers either come from outside the country, potentially, that's where this cap comes in that we're going to talk about, or they can transfer to you from an opposite season organization. So if your season is that May through October season, you could have someone come that has an October through May season where it bookends your season and the workers can come work for you. So in Wisconsin, a lot of the workers are going to be coming from, realistically, if they come in country, from Florida, from Arizona, or from ski country. Okay. The way that the H2B visa process goes is up until the very last step, it's all about the position, not the people. So when we do an H2B application, what we ask our clients at the very outset of the process is, what are the roles that you need filled? Now, you can apply for any role at your organization. It actually reverts back to whatever the roles are at your organization. So if you call cooks, a weird phrase, that's actually what you would apply for, is the name of the position at your organization. But it's important to understand you're applying for the roles. So the more roles that you apply for, the more money you're going to ultimately spend. Okay. The people, the reason why you're actually doing this to get staff, they don't come in until the very last step of the process. So these are the popular positions that we're seeing right now, in no particular order, other than this is the way my brain was working when I put this together. But a lot of back of house in the kitchen, front of house in the restaurant, housekeepers, front desk, and you can see the list goes on and on. Again, it's really about what you need. If you need a certain role at your organization, that's what you should apply for. It's about filling your open needs. Now, years ago, when I was first starting to do H2Bs on a large scale, I remember a lot of organizations said to me, well, we're too small. We don't qualify. We wouldn't qualify for this visa. And that is definitely a myth. You can be any size to do this. Some of our clients might apply for 1 to 3 people on a position. And they find that that's impactful for them because it fills those open needs. Conversely, we have some super big clients that file for like 500 H2Bs in a year, but you don't have to be that behemoth to file. It's really, if you have a seasonal need and you can't fill open positions, you can be any size and you can really use this program. My one caution though is you need to make sure that you have someone in your organization that can move this forward. I'm going to show you in a slide or two what the process actually looks like, and you'll see there's a lot to this. So you don't want to do this if you can't do the work and the recruiting aspects of it, but the size of the organization really has no bearing on whether or not you qualify. Now, one question that I get a lot is, are you required to pay for housing and transportation, right? Right now, staffing and the lack of housing go hand in hand. Because if you could get more housing, or if housing was cheaper in your areas, people might be able to move there and actually do the work. So the answer from an H2B standpoint is, under the legal regulations, you are not required to provide housing or daily transportation to and from the work site to H2B workers. Okay, it's not required. But practically, we're going to talk a lot about supply and demand and how competitive the recruiting is during this webinar. And you're going to be really negatively impacted if you can't answer the question of where are the workers going to live and how are they going to get to work. So you don't have to provide it, but you do need to have an answer. And I'll talk about this more when we go through costs, but at this point, because recruiting is so competitive, a lot of employers are subsidizing the housing cost. Okay, so this is what, So let's talk about the process itself. The process, which I'm going to show you on the next slide, is all about your start date. The start date dictates all of the deadlines and the filing requirements for the application. And different positions can have different start dates. That being said, this is one of the most important things I'm going to tell you during this entire webinar, because if you start on time, we can make sure that you stay on target. The problem with H2Bs right now, though, is it's very hard it's very hard, if not impossible, to start late. So we start all of our spring, summer start dates. Anyone that has a start date between April to September, we start those petitions in bulk at our office in mid-September. If your organization has a winter start date, fall, winter, October through March, we start all of those on April 1st. All right. If you start based on the dates on this slide, the petition itself goes pretty smoothly. I'm not saying it's work free, but I am saying to you, you're set up for success if you start on time. Okay, this is what the process looks like. Now, just understand, at our office, this document, this flowchart, is actually about 100 and something. It's like 172 action items for our team. So I'm boiling this down to the basics here. But what you can see as you read through this, and I'm not going to go through each step individually, but what you can see on here is there's multiple government agencies involved. You have the Department of Labor, the U.S. Department of Labor. You have U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, which is the immigration agency. And then if the people are coming from overseas, you also have the Department of State to issue their visas or their visas at consulates or embassies. What you can also see on here is the amount of information you need from at the beginning is a lot less than what you need as you go. So what I mean by that is when we first start the application, all we need to figure out is what job categories and what are the dates that you want to file for. But we don't even need to know the total numbers until about 2.5 months later. One thing I always like to show during this on this slide is this piece right here, filing the application with the U.S. Department of Labor. This weirdly is the biggest step of the process. But you can see it falls right in the middle of it. We have to file this application in a 2-week window that falls 90 to 75 days before your start date. If we miss that filing window, we either have to push your start date back or your application gets denied. Now, the other thing to just mention here is if you're trying to get out of country workers with a summer start date, with an April start date, we have to file this in the first 3 days of when we can. So basically 90 to 87 days before your start date. But my point with all of this is why we can't start late. And for any of you that may have done H2Bs years ago, the entire process got overhauled in 2015. And this is where this all happened. We used to be able to catch clients up, and that is no longer the case with the application. So one thing I'll say to you now, and I don't want to give you bad news to start, but I just want to be realistic with the group. It's almost certainly too late to look at this for the 2023 season if you're a spring summer start date. I would advise all of you to look at this at the earliest for either fall of 2023 or spring of 2024. I think that if you try to rush it, you're gonna be very upset that you started so late. Bill wanted me to just quickly talk about the pricing. I think this is helpful to just understand. With J1s, oftentimes you're paying nothing, right? With H2Bs, you are. And one of the really important things to know is when the government overhauled the laws in 2015, they made it very clear that the only cost that you can put on the worker is housing. Other than that, you have to pay for it, and there's massive penalties for trying to claw back any of this money. But what the petition costs, and I can only base this off of my firm's fees, but about $7,000, $7,500 for the full position. So if you're filing for a group of cooks, about $6,750 to $7,500 for that group of cooks. If they're coming from outside the country, then we don't charge per person. If they're doing that in-country transfer, it's $350 per person. You always have to get people to you for the start of the season. So daily transportation is not required, but you are mandated to get people to your work site on day one. So if they're flying from overseas, that's going to be a big cost. If they're flying domestically from one of those areas I mentioned before, Florida, Arizona, ski country, it might be less. If they're driving, you reimburse based on the IRS mileage reimbursement rate. You're only responsible for getting them home if they work the whole season or you fire them and they're going back to their home country. So if the worker transfers back to a winter season property in this analogy that I keep using, you would not have to pay for their outbound travel. Now, if they're coming from overseas, you also have to pay for their embassy and consulate costs, which right now is $290 per person. If you use a recruiter, there's recruiter costs. You also have to pay for food during the days of travel, which the government actually sets. It's about $55 per day. And I mentioned this before. A lot of our clients are now subsidizing housing just to make their properties more competitive when they're doing H2B recruiting. Okay, so before I get into this demand thing, let's talk about the positives. I like to think of myself as a pretty positive person. H2Bs can be really good. When it works, anyone that does it seems to want to do it forever afterwards. You get really good workers. They're here to work. These people want to work as many hours as you will throw at them. A lot of times it will change the culture of the property, meaning like they show people how to work, like what working hard actually looks like. You can actually potentially bring them back year after year, which is wonderful because then you have to train them on subsequent years. So there's a lot of positives here. The demand is the negative. Okay. If I didn't have to talk about the next few slides, I would say to you, H2Bs are a budget decision, but if the budget works for you, you should do it. Because I've seen how impactful H2Bs can be. But this is a very big deal, what I'm about to show you. So this is what you need to weigh the positives and the cost against. Okay. Right now, because of the staffing crisis, H2Bs have never been in higher demand. I am seeing just incredible demand for this from organizations that historically would never have considered H2Bs before. The problem with that is that in 1990, which was what, 32 years ago, the federal government, when they passed H2Bs, Congress put an arbitrary limit on how many H2B visas it would issue every year. It doesn't tie into unemployment rates, any metric whatsoever that would help to understand what the real demand is. Doesn't tie into staffing and unemployment rates. It's just a very set number. And the way that it works is the government uses an October 1st start to its fiscal year. So everything with the government starts October 1st. So from October 1st until March 31st, there are 33,000 H2B visas available, 33,000. Then from April 1st until September 30th, the other 33,000 are available. So 66,000 split into one set starts October 1st, the other starts April 1st. Once they're used up, they're done for those 6 months period, and then it resets either on October 1st or April 1st. Importantly, very importantly, the cap only applies to people coming from outside the country or for those who are here that don't have H2Bs. So someone trying to transition from a J1 to H2B, they would count against this cap. But if someone has an H2B visa and they're working in Florida and want to transfer up to Wisconsin, they do not count against this numerical cap. So here's how it plays out in reality, okay? I think most of you on this webinar are probably summer start dates, which means that you have an April, May, June start date. For summer season, it's ridiculous how competitive it is. I mentioned before, right? What Congress did when they created H2Bs is they split the number in half. But when they did that, they actually created an unequal distribution of H2Bs because most filers, based on the industries and the geography of where the industry they're in and the geography of where they're situated, most of them fall into the summer season cap. To the point that for summer season start dates for April, May, June, the cap is hit on the first day. So the first day is April 1st. If you have an April 1st start date, you might get out of country workers. If you have an April 2nd start date, no way it's happening. But not only that, but look at what happened last year, okay? In 1 year, from 2021 to 2022, the government saw about 40,000 more workers sponsored for H2B visas. That's crazy because the total cap is only 33,000, okay? And the way that the government does this is they do a random lottery. So if you have an April 1st start date, if you file in the first 3 days that you can file, which is, remember that whole 90 days before you file. So January 1st is 90 days. If you file on January 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, they put you in a random lottery and it's just based on luck. And each position goes into a different, gets a different lottery shot, and it's an all or nothing proposition. So let's say you need 40 cooks and 30 housekeepers. If the housekeepers does well in the lottery, you get all 30. But if the cooks don't, then you're not going to get any of them. Now, the government knows that it has a problem on its hands. So what it keeps doing, or what it has done prior to this announcement from 2 weeks ago, is it's added more visas through this thing called a supplemental cap. So the government has said, and when I say the government, Congress has authorized Homeland Security to do it, and then Homeland Security is the one that actually releases it. So for this past summer season, summer 2022, Homeland Security actually released 35,000 additional visas. Again, the initial cap is only 33,000. So they actually released even more. It was the most they've ever done. They're playing this weird game though. And so you can see what they did here. So 23,500. They said that the workers had to be returning workers, meaning that they had to have worked in the United States in H2B status in one of the last 3 years. Okay. The other 11,500, they didn't have to be returning workers, but the workers had to be citizens of Haiti, Honduras, Guatemala, or El Salvador. It relates to the whole Mexican border crisis and some of the Biden administration initiatives. What we also saw is that it increased the chances of these paper Department of Labor audits, which the paper audits never scare me. I don't see a lot of consequences for employers, but frankly, it's a pain in the butt, and you never want the government looking at anything. But the reason why the audits crept up is, in addition to either being a returning worker or being a citizen of one of those countries, the employers also had to sign this attestation that said that if they didn't get these H2B workers, their organization would suffer irreparable harm, which so the government is basically saying without the H2B workers, they were going to go out of business. So that's something to remember, because we're going to talk more about that irreparable harm provision as we talk about the future. The first day to file was May 18th. So there was a delay. The good news is, had there not been some consulate and embassy delays that are still there due to COVID, a lot of the workers would have been here by July 4th, which I know for a lot of our clients is really the biggest thing that they're looking for. There was a lottery held for the 23,500, so they still didn't release enough. But I didn't mention this before. That initial lottery that I mentioned for the April 1st clients, that the chances in that lottery is this past year was less than 25%. I'm going to say that one more time. The chances in that initial lottery for out-of-country workers, if you had an April 1st start date, was less than 25%. For the second lottery, for the supplemental cap, it was closer to 95, 98%. So overall, people were happy. Some organizations, though, just to say it out loud, did see bad lottery results 2 times in a row. All right, so that's the summer side. For the winter side, I used to get up in front of organizations like yours, associations, I should say, and say, if you have a fall winter start date, you are lucky because we don't even have to talk about the cap. Those days are also unfortunately behind us. Where we are now is this is the second year in a row that the winter season cap was hit early. So in 2021 to 2022 season, so not for this coming, not for the current winter, but for last year, if organizations had a December 1st start date or later, they were impacted by this. So for winter season, they don't do this big lottery like what they do for the April 1st start dates. But in some ways, it's almost worse because we don't know exactly when it's going to be hit. This year, it was even worse. This year, what we saw is it affected organizations with November 1st start dates and later. So this is a very big deal because especially our ski area clients, we work a lot with the ski industry. A lot of them start after November 1st. So the demand is just so high. And it creates a lot of uncertainty getting in these out-of-country workers. Now, last year, for the first time, they added extra visas for winter. And you can see they did 20,000 additional visas through a supplemental cap. They did the same thing that they did for summer, just in a different number here. But they set aside 13,500 for these returning workers and 6,000 for those same countries. And again, the organizations that filed had to attest to irreparable harm. But you can see here, they waited so long. The first day to file wasn't until January 28th. In the best case scenario, organizations weren't even getting approvals till a week or two after, and then people still had to go into the embassy. So that cap was never reached, but the real reason why it was never reached is the government took too long to release it. So that's what happened before. Now, this is what happened on October 12th, which, 2.5 weeks ago now, okay? We've never seen this before, and we're still left with a million questions. So initially when Bill asked me if I would do this webinar, I was like, I'm always happy to do it, but we don't have enough information. And then, we're talking about a lot more than just this. But here's what the government did. They said that for the 2023 government fiscal year, so from October 1st of last month, from October 1st of this year through September 30th of next year, they're releasing about 65,000 additional visas on top of the 66,000. So they're essentially doubling the cap. Okay, they're reserving 20,000 of those for those countries that we looked at before. There's the other parts going to be for returning workers, and we might have to do extra U.S. worker recruitment. Although, don't worry about the U.S. worker recruitment. I call it kind of the fake recruiting because it almost never results in actually anyone of consequence applying. But the problem is we're kind of left with where we've been in the past, which is organizations like WHLA, they work so hard to lobby the government to do stuff like this. But then in practice, we're left with a million questions because we don't know the timing and the details, right? We get the general framework of what they're thinking, but they haven't made any announcements in the last 3 weeks since they announced this. And we don't know when can you apply? How are these numbers going to be split? Will employers have to sign another financial hardship attestation? There's a lot left to not know. The positive, though, is, especially for summer season organizations, A lot of this will likely get fleshed out now, like in the next few weeks, because again, the winter cap was already hit, right? So we're a month into the government winter season. A lot of those ski areas and the later start dates are scrambling right now, and they're very anxious to see this take effect. But in order to do that, I would think that the government's going to try to map out the entire framework for summer as well. So if you are thinking about doing H2Bs for summer 2023, hopefully you've already gotten started on it, and you are insistent on going out of country, hopefully this will help you as you're navigating the process, because hopefully we'll learn some details soon. But for right now, this is what we know, but I will tell you, we have more questions than answers today. All right. So I said this before, the out of country only is the only group of workers that counts against the cap. So if you're able to find and recruit H2B workers inside the United States, that gives you some certainty where you don't have to worry about a random lottery or all these other unknowns surrounding the supplemental cap and so on. So if you can find in-country workers, you can staff. As a business owner, this is where I would look. Okay. But here's what you need to know. First of all, what I just told you is not a secret. Okay. People generally at this point understand that if they use in-country workers, they don't have to worry about this cap. And so what's happened is, just like the out-of-country cap has gotten very competitive, in-country recruiting has gotten very competitive as well. I know this isn't the focus of the webinar today, but I'm happy to talk to any of you in terms of just some best strategies surrounding in-country recruiting. But just know that if you're going down this road, you're entering a very competitive recruiting market. Now, workers, H2B workers, they can stay in the United States for 3 years consecutively. During those 3 years, they have to bounce between seasons, right? So they're going summer season, winter season, summer season, winter season. They can do that for 3 years in total. Then they have to go home for 3 months. Then they can come back for 3 years, home for 3 months, back for 3 years. One of the most common questions I get is, if someone's already here with an H2B visa, do you still have to go through that long process that I outlined on a previous slide? And the answer is yes. The designation of whether the workers are coming from outside the US or in is the very last step of the process. So you still, as an employer, you need to go through this long process to get authorization to employ these H2B workers, even if they already have the visa. But the workers can stay for 3 years consecutively, and then they can reset that amount. So, ideally, you can get them at the early side of that 3-year limit, and they can at least work for you for 3 years during your busy seasons. The government is fine with overlaps. So if a worker has, let's say your organization has a May 1st start date, if their winter employer doesn't end until June, the government will approve them for H2B status because there's an overlap, right? There's that month where, even though there's an overlap of seasons, the worker never has a gap. But what we've seen over the last couple of years is, if there's a gap, so let's say their winter employer ends April 1st and your petition starts May 1st, it's a month-long gap, and the government doesn't like that anymore. So if you're doing in-country recruiting, understanding this whole gap issue and the 3-year limit issue are crucial, because I mentioned this before, right? The recruiting is really hard. You want to make sure you're recruiting people that will ultimately get approved. Okay, so what a lot of our clients have done, and we do this a lot with Seasonal Connect, is really work on partnering with other organizations, where rather than going worker by worker, they'll connect with an opposite season employer so that they can get a group of workers together. And ideally, the organizations will have some commonalities. They might even have some shared systems in place, or not shared, but some similar systems in place. There's a lot of benefits to doing this in-country model. And so basically what would happen is, if I'm a summer season employer, I'd be able to meet some winter season employers, say to them, hey, I'm doing H2Bs. We are looking for these positions. Here are our dates. Would this be of interest to you? Would this work? Here's what we look for in our workers. Here's what our organization is like. Would your workers enjoy working here? And so creating those relationships is really important because those employers can vouch for you. You can, again, get a bigger number of people rather than doing one by one, and it can create some really lasting recruiting relationships for your organization. I mentioned this before. You need to be really careful about gaps. You need to be understanding of overlaps, because while the petition will be approved, the worker can only be in one place at one time. You need to be careful about understanding what your needs are versus creating relationships, meaning you need to make sure that you're getting what you need, not just trying to connect with the glitziest organization out there. And you need to make sure you're expanding your recruiting base, right? I mean, your association is all about lodging and hotels, but it might be worthwhile to partner with ski areas. It might be worthwhile to partner with country clubs and restaurants. It's really trying to cast a wide net and trying to find organizations that make the most sense for you. Okay. In terms of kind of just general updates and kind of leaving you with some high points, here's kind of the landscape of H2Bs. It's all about demand right now. It's all about the supply and demand issue where there's not enough visas for the demand that's out there for out of country. It's all about the competitive in-country recruiting. It's also about understanding that this cap announcement that happened in mid-October, it sounds great on its face, but there's a lot of questions and there's a lot of uncertainty around it, including timing. I would think very much about whether you're comfortable signing a financial hardship attestation. And I'm not sure that'll be in there, but my gut says it will be. The other thing that I haven't talked a lot about today is there's massive delays at the government. They've been short-staffed for a while. They have been short-staffed in a climate where they've also gotten more petitions than they've ever received. It's a really big issue. And that's why I said to you, I would be very careful about doing H2Bs for summer 2023 if you haven't started already, because in addition to other things, with all of those, in addition to all the timing issues relating to deadlines, there's also some timing issues related to government processing. And there's a lot of actually sub applications within the bigger context of the whole process. And some of those sub applications are really delayed and could cause problems for you. So basically, it's all about supply and demand and navigating these delays at immigration. That's kind of where things stand right now with H2Bs. Okay, these are the common mistakes I see, and I see this time and again. All right, one of them is not planning ahead. H2Bs are something that's all about planning. So I hope you're not feeling, dejected that you might be too late for summer 2023. But the way I look at that is that's okay, because it gives you plenty of time to plan for the next year. If you plan ahead, it does wonders to make the program really good. It allows you to train your managers and help them understand what the requirements are. It helps you to really have enough time to go through the process to try to figure out the housing conundrum. Planning ahead is so important. I see organizations constantly not ask questions. And one of the things to just say out loud is the H2B process is a massive legal process. All right. There's a lot of organizations out there that do H2Bs that are not law firms. And I would run away from them, because a lot of them don't understand that what they're doing is they're attesting to legal obligations on every application that they're filing. And I mentioned there's multiple applications. You don't want to work with anybody that's all about getting you the people. You really need to make sure that you're protecting yourself by working with a lawyer. There's a place for recruiters in this, but you need to be really careful that you're using a lawyer to file the paperwork. And asking a ton of questions. The more questions you can ask means that you're going to be so educated, which means you're going to be ready for whatever's coming at you. Missing deadlines is an obvious one. There's some deadlines that can't be moved with this process, so the deadlines are really important. Now, communicating with department heads. I would say this is also just the bigger issue of recruiting in general. So many organizations are trying so hard to bring in great staff, but it's very easy for department heads to undermine it on day one if they're doing something counter to what you've told your staff. And this is an area where department heads are really controlling a lot of the obligations that you're going to be committing yourself to. So make sure they understand what you have to do. Multiple points of contact. I mentioned this before. You want to have one person that's primarily in charge of H2Bs at your property. And trying to spread it out doesn't seem to work. It also leads to passive recruiting. By having someone that's really responsible for this, it also makes sure that someone really has the onus on him or her to be active in recruiting, because passive recruiting with H2Bs is going to kill you. We can get you a very shiny approval notice, but if you don't have the workers to show for it, it's worthless. Too much reliance on recruiters, I already covered. Not communicating with the workers and setting expectations, just like you need to communicate with the department heads. Make sure the workers understand what they're getting into and what your organization's like, and when you're busy and when you're not busy, and so on. And then the gaps and overlaps in employment. All right, so just a quick hypothetical, just to try to really get this in all of our heads. So you operate a hotel in Wisconsin, you're busy during the summer, you need cooks. Your busy season runs from April through November, with you being mostly busy from mid-May to late September. You have whatever number of year-round staff, that's irrelevant. You do not have staff housing, but you think you can find some locally. So what do? So the first thing I would say is you don't give up on all of your other recruiting methods, right? So keep trying to find those Americans. If you do J1s, or if you don't do J1s, look at that program. But this is a perfect opportunity to explore H2Bs, right? You can see with the fourth bullet point, your busy season runs from April through November, but you get most busy basically when the kids get out of school, or leading up to when they get out of school. So with the J1s, if you do J1s, they're probably going to come from May, June, July, August, right? Those are going to be the months that you have them. With H2Bs though, you can actually apply from April through November, so you get those shoulder seasons. You should apply for the full number of cooks that you need. And basically, I purposely put April here, okay? Let's say that you want to apply for April 1st. April 1st gets you automatically into the out-of-country lottery. But my strong opinion on this is I would still try to find in-country workers, because your chances in the lottery are not good. It is more likely, significantly more likely, that you're not going to do well in the lottery, and you're going to have to rely on the supplemental cap or try to pivot really late to in-country workers, which doesn't work. But I think that this is a perfect example of a hotel that could really benefit from H2B workers, because they can get them for longer. You can get them for those shoulder seasons. So should you, excuse me, should you utilize H2B workers at your property? Maybe. You saw the cost. In terms of the obligations, most of the laws really just are getting at making sure that you're treating your Americans and your H2Bs the same. I think a lot of you are probably in this stage right now of, let's try it, because you're desperate for staff. And I think that might be a good way to look at it, is if you're feeling like you can't staff a certain role, or maybe 2 or 3 roles, it's something to look at, but it shouldn't be the only plan you have. And it's worth trying kind of slow to start and going from there. I'm a huge believer in H2Bs. I said that at the beginning. I've seen it change organizations. It's not for everybody though. And it's worth ramping up. It's not worth like putting everything into it your first year. I would definitely start slow with the process. And again, do not put all of your eggs into one basket. We're past the time where we've been doing in-country transfers at our office for about 7-8 years now, of really promoting them. Early on, we were definitely ahead of it. And I would have said to you, hey guys, here's a secret. And I would have said, do H2Bs, just do in-country. Now I'm saying to you, diversify your staffing. The H2B visas is a great tool in your arsenal, but it's not the be all end all. But it is a real tool to find workers that want to work as many hours as you'll throw them. It's just navigating a lot of the issues we talked about with the demand. I just briefly want to touch on my other company, because it was truly created to solve this whole in-country thing. Seasonal Connect, among other things, is a tool where it helps you find in-country H2B workers and helps you connect with other employers with opposite seasons. So it does these 2 big things. It also allows you to find Americans, J1 workers, out-of-country H2Bs. But these 2 things that I've been speaking a lot about as terms of a solution with H2Bs, of in-country H2Bs and these recruiting partners, both of those things can be found through Seasonal Connect. You can do an employer search, you can do a worker search, you can post jobs, you can actually dictate, you can say in the job posting what you're looking for, meaning like in-country H2Bs. And then we do a lot of these in-person and virtual events to connect the employers with one another. really facilitate these connections, and it works. I've seen some really small employers that have always struggled to really create recruiting relationships catch on with really big employers that would never have spoken with them had they not met at these conferences. So the events go such a long way in solidifying those relationships. If you want more information or want to sign up, you can just sign up right online at seasonalconnect.com. All right, so we definitely have time for questions. I'm happy to answer anything and everything. You can either unmute or put it in the chat box.
Yeah, if people want to chat anything, I'm happy to read them to you, Keith. Otherwise, if we have a small enough group, I think you can also just unmute and ask questions. Well, while we wait, why don't we
I have a quick question. Keith, well, first of all, thank you again for showcasing presentation and updated information to the team. Are you in your law firm able to take on additional clients to be able to assist with the process? Maybe a question for some.
So maybe. My honest answer is last Friday was the last day that we were really taking on new clients. I mean, Dave, I'm always happy to talk. Part of the problem is, even if we were able to take on a new client, I don't know that it would be the right move for the client to move forward now. But I am always happy to talk and see if it makes sense. But it might be too late regardless of whether or not we took on a client.
I was referring to getting ready for the 24 season.
Oh, 24, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we would love to have you as a associate member of Wisconsin Hotel Lodging Association and continue to help plug that for a future year if possible.
Thanks, Dave. Well, nice plug too.
We did have one more that came in over the chat. Somebody asking if this will be available to share with other members of our organization. The answer is yes, we are recording this. It'll take a little while to process, but we'll post it in the member portal at our website. And we will be including it in our insider newsletter. Tomorrow, there should be a link in there, but it will be up there tonight. As long as you have your login for the website, or if you can set your staff up with the login as well, you'll be able to access it. So.
And Bill, I should also say, if anyone wants to talk through whether or not this might be a good fit for them, I never charge for those calls. Like I'm happy to do it. I also am not someone that ever will push H2Bs. It really, if you're just looking for more information and just trying to bounce specifics off of me, I'm more than happy to be a resource for the association.
Thank you. I know I can say for me, the most eye-opening thing about all this is the timeline and how crazy the timeline is to get everything together and how much planning goes into it. I'm sure there are plenty of people here that are bummed out that they can't do it for next summer, but I mean, I think we've all seen the same reports coming out nationwide that we're going to be struggling with this for a while, and in Wisconsin in particular, is our population is projected to go, our workforce population is projected to go down. So we did get another question in, Keith. Could you explain the cost per petition again versus the cost per person, and could you possibly give an example?
Yeah, so as a business owner, I understand why you would want, as a business owner, I would want to know, what is each person costing me? But the way that the workflow works with the actual applications, it's all about the job category. So you want to look at the job you need. So let's say you need housekeepers at your hotel. The whole group of housekeepers is going to run you between about $6,700 to $7,300. Those are all the petition fees included: legal fees with my firm, government fees, and mailing fees. If you're doing out of country, there's no per person cost. If you do in country, there's also a $350 per person cost. But that $350, just to say this out loud, it gets dispersed among, you're going to spend it regardless. There's other costs that happen for out of country that don't for in. It ends up being a wash. But basically, when I'm saying that, what this all means is that you're going to feel like you get more for your money the more people you put on your application, right? So meaning that the cost is the same for 2 housekeepers as it is for 10, as those base fees, but you want to apply for what you actually need. So if you're trying to find the per person cost, you'd have to figure out what you need first and then divide it. But ultimately, it's really by the position.
And at the end of the day, then I guess you're just saying it's a bit of a gamble too, right? Didn't you say it was 25% of the lottery gets awarded? So does that mean that I apply with my $7,000 or whatever it costs, and I might actually not get anybody for it?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you, if you don't make it in under the lottery and you want to go out of country, you get about $2,100 back of that. So the real gamble is, let's say, 5,000 to 6,000. The thing I will tell you is, if you're gonna go out of country, it's absolutely a gamble, right? Like there's no way it's not a gamble. If you're going in country, it's still a little bit of a gamble but it's a different type of gamble. It's a recruiting gamble. And it's making sure you have all the tools available to you and that you're really ready to go recruit hard. But I see the in-country as less of a gamble. I mean, I'm not saying in-country recruiting is easy, but there's actually there's solutions out there. And I mean, I'm trying not to promote too hard here, but like Seasonal Connect was made with this purpose in mind, and we've seen success there. So, if you're going to go down the in-country road, I think, to me, like, join Seasonal Connect. It's going to give you some real resources. But if you're insistent on the out of country, it is absolutely a gamble.
Great. Well, we got another question. And are there certain countries that we cannot bring out of country workers in from?
There are, although they're very excuse me. I'm fighting off an awful man cold right now, though. There are some countries that are ineligible, although a lot of countries are. So every year, Homeland Security has to designate the countries. About 4 years ago, they actually removed the Philippines and they just added it back along with the Dominican Republic. At this point, most countries are eligible. The ones that aren't, that I see the most interest from, are some of the Asian countries, where you see J1s from like mainland China or India, and those are not eligible countries for H2Bs.
Great, thank you. Any further questions for Keith?
One question. I think you mentioned it a couple of times in reference to the April 1st start date for an employee. Can you just talk through that one more time to make sure I'm understanding the difference between that and if they started April 15th, for example?
Yeah, well, so good question. So remember, it's all about your organization's start date, not necessarily when they actually start. And it's also about your season. So you're in a state that's similar to mine, although I think you're even colder. But April in Massachusetts is so cold sometimes, right? There's still snow on the ground. And so a lot of, and we work with, I'll give you another example. We work with a client in close to Burlington, Vermont. They turn off the water and they leave it off until about May 1st. And then their property really opens closer to the end of May. They would never be able to do an April 1st start date because there's no work for those workers. There's not even training, right? There's just nothing there. So the way that this works is, if your organization truly has a need for the workers to start on April 1st, your petition will automatically go through the out-of-country lottery. Whether or not it does well in that lottery, you know that by about mid-January. But if it's an April 1st start date, it gets put through the lottery. If you don't have an April 1st start date, it doesn't even touch the lottery, because by the time that your start date comes up in terms of the government looking at it, the H2B out of country visas are already exhausted.
And so that's where the in-country piece comes in, right? You can
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. We had another question. Are you able to get an H2B visa for someone that happens to be in the U.S. but are not U.S. citizens, or do not have any other type of visas?
No, that's a great question. If someone is here illegally, and I'm saying this with the least amount of judgment anyone could ever say, they are not eligible to go onto a work visa, including an H2B. So they either need to be outside the country, the people that you're sponsoring, or in the country with valid visa status.
All right, we got just a couple minutes. Anyone else? A minute on pause, or on mute, I should say. Well, I guess hearing nothing else, Keith, I really want to thank you for making the time for us and introducing yourself and your company and all of that. I learned a lot on here, and I'm sure everybody else on the call has too. As I mentioned before, we did record this, and we will be posting it on our website, so watch for information on that. I'm sure a lot of you will be joining us next week at our annual conference. Look forward to seeing you there. If you haven't signed up, registration is closed, but we might be able to squeak you in, so feel free to drop me or Monica a line. Other than that, thanks all for participating, and Keith, thanks again for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bill. Thanks, everybody.
Bye now.
Bye.